joint tenancy. And there's a lot more to this one. So we're dealing with figure 5.2 at the bottom. If you look in the top left circle of that figure, you'll see a circle, or I'm sorry, you'll see three owners, A, B, and C. There's something that's missing in there. What's missing? A line. That's right. Because in joint tenancy, there is a specific part of that. In that, there is no division of interest. No division. A, B, and C own this all together. A can't do anything without B and C. B can't do anything without A and C, and so forth. So it's, I can't mortgage my part. I can't sell my part. I can't will my part. We all own this together. So we all make a decision, or we don't make a decision at all. So we are not separate. Another part of joint tenancy that is unique from a tenant in common is that the division of interest always has to be equal. So in tenant in common, we can choose any fraction we want, 50-50, 60-40, whatever. As a joint tenant, it has to be equal. It cannot be unequal, as specifically the definition. So if we have three partners, all of us own 33 1/3. If there's two of us, it has to be 50-50. If there's four of us, it has to be 25%. I don't get a choice. I can't say, well, I'm going into this with you and we're both partners, but I put up more money, I put up more time, I want 70%, you can get 30%. If we're joint tenants, we can't do that. It has to be 50-50. So in that scenario, then I might want to look at a tenant in common if I want to split up that difference, if I want me to have more or you to have less, whatever the situation is. So a joint tenant, we have to be equal. And whatever it is, everybody has an equal share. The other component of this, the next component that's important to know about joint tenancy, is that it has another unique characteristic, what they call right of survivorship. Here's what makes this very interesting, depending on people's not understanding, but just what they get into. So what we're saying here is that the last man standing is the final owner, is the ultimate owner. So you'll notice in the top right circle that C passed away. What happens to C's ownership? What happens to their control? What happens to all that? It was equal divided. It was absorbed by A and B. So what does that mean to C's heirs? C's a father and has children. Does children get anything? No. Answer is no. They got squat. That's pretty serious. And some people will take ownership of property. That was my example today. Husband and wife bought their property as joint tenants because of this right of survivorship. And that makes sense, maybe. Husband and wife own the property. The husband dies. The wife wants the property. The husband wants the wife to have the property. I get that. Makes total sense. Joint tenancy is perfect until they get divorced. And that's what our situation was. People got divorced. They're still joint tenants. Husband passes away. The ex-wife gets all of that. The husband's kids, whomever, his brothers, sisters, whomever, that would might get some of this ownership or get some money out of it specifically, gets nothing because the ex-wife gets it. And the same thing with if the wife passed, the ex-husband gets it all. So this is something that we don't go into lightly. Usually what we'll do is we do this with family members. Again, married couples or people that are in partnerships, whatever, just I'm doing this because I know that if I pass away, my partner's going to get it. And that's what I want. And if that's what you want, great. No problem. It's not that this is bad. But I'm going to give you another example here in a minute where this gets to be or can be ugly. So ultimately what we're showing here then is that dropping down to the bottom left circle, you'll see that now B passed away and A is now the ultimate owner of this property. So if B and C contributed money into this thing, if we're looking at this as an investment property, let's say, and B and C put money and time and effort and all into this thing, if they pass away, they got nothing out of it, their heirs got nothing out of it, and all they did was contribute more to the surviving members. So what you want to do is you want to be A. You're praying for death. You're picking really, really old joint partners. It's terrible. It's terrible. But anyway, the point is that ultimately, that's the conclusion to this. And if you understand that that's the conclusion and you choose to do that, no problem. But there have been many situations where people didn't understand that's what they're getting into. So another example of that, where this gets to be an issue, and if I can back up for a moment, it's usually the default, not always, but it's usually the default that if we're talking about married couples specifically. You have a married couple that's buying property together, that the default is joint tenancy. Because in most situations, that's what they want, and it makes sense. I pass away, I want my wife to have the property. Totally get it, makes sense, that's what we'd want to do. There's an example of that scenario that maybe I wouldn't want to do that. So use myself as the example for this. I was married. I have 2 children with my ex-wife. I am now remarried. Don't have any children with my current wife. If I were to take ownership of our current home as a joint tenant with my current wife, if I pass away, my kids get nothing. My now wife, who is not the mother of my children, may not care about my kids. Now I know she does, so I'm using it as an example, but this has happened. Where you'll have, just use the example that the husband passes away, he has children from a prior marriage, he passes, and the ex-wife gets the property and says, screw your kids. Forgive me, but that's just what happens. I've seen it happen, and it gets ugly and nasty. And because it's joint tenants, that's what that means. So if the default was the joint tenants because I'm a married couple, and that might make sense under more normal circumstances, I might want to think about that conclusion. And knowing that that's the way joint tenancy works, I might rather choose a tenant in common situation. Because in both cases, we can be equal owners. There's no difference that we're half owners. Whether it's a joint tenant or a tenant in common, we can structure it so that we are equal owners of this thing. But with a tenant in common, we avoid that right of survivorship. So when one of the spouses, one of the parties passes, it doesn't automatically transfer. Now again, if that's what I want, I'm divorced and I have my new wife and she's not the parent of my children, or the mother of my children, and I'm okay with her having the property, that I have something else set up for my kids, then do that. It's not to say that it's right or wrong, but here just engages that complex thought process of what's right. And I can tell you that a lot of times it's not the default. It's not the joint tenant necessarily. And I've helped many people, a lot of people, I mean, hundreds of people that have been in this situation, that once they understood what right of survivorship meant and joint tenancy in general, they're like, holy crap, I had no idea. Nobody ever told me that. I need to talk to somebody about changing this up, that maybe I want to be a tenant in common or something else. Because that's what happens so often. The last thing about joint tenancy is at the top of 47, that it has some rules. It has, and the 4 rules are best memorized by an acronym called PITT. P-I-T-T. You'll see that there at the top of that page. PITT. Tenant in common does not have this. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship requires PITT to exist. PITT includes the 4 elements. The first one is that we have to have equal possession. These are things we've already talked about, but just helping you to further understand joint tenancy. Meaning that we all have same possession of this property. That none of us have a separate ownership. That I don't get mine separate from yours like A and B did at the top. All of us own this. Interest is the second element. Interest meaning that we all have an equal, undivided share. That we don't get to split it up in some funky fashion. That if there's 2 of us, it has to be 50-50. If there's 3 of us, it has to be 33 1/3, and so on. So I don't get to split it up. So we already talked about those 2. The 3rd and 4th unity that we get into are time and title. Yeah. Time and title, meaning that we all took possession of this property at the same time. If A and B own the property and we decided to add C after the fact, we wouldn't have joint tenancy because C was not an owner of the property with A and B at the same time. A and B owned it, then we added C later. In order to have joint tenancy, all of us have to take ownership at the same time. Now there's a way around that, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but essentially we're all taking ownership at the same time. And also lastly, that we all have to be on the same title. It can't be that we have a split title, that I own half and you own half. Kind of gets back to that interest of undivided, that we are all on the same title, that we all own the same property at the same time with the same document, that our names are all on that document, not 2 and 1 or whatever like that. So PIT is the component or is what is required to have that. Possession, interest, time, and title.